It's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In the last blog, I talked about 3-year-old ventilator-dependent pre-Emmy has never gone home from intensive care. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to ask the question, when will politicians recognize the value of intensive care at home? Governments on a state and on a federal level keep pumping in billions of dollars into public and private hospitals. A big bulk of that government money is going to intensive care units. In fact, intensive care is by far the most expensive area in a hospital when intensive care beds are costing in excess of $5,000 per bed day. Will politicians therefore just keep handing out money like candy without actually looking at how the cost of some intensive care beds can be reduced by more than 50%? Plus, you have the added on benefit of freeing up one of the most sought after and in demand resources in a hospital, the intensive care beds. Therefore, providing intensive care at home services for long-term life support dependent patients with ventilation and tracheostomy or with other medically complex issues is a no-brainer. Not only on a quality of life level for patients and their families, it's also a no-brainer for hospitals, intensive care units, as well as state and federal governments to support such win-win situations. If you are a regular reader or watcher of this blog, you would have seen over the last few weeks where I have shared on this blog that many children are held hostage in intensive care, where clinicians think there is no perceived alternative but to keep those life support dependent children in intensive care. The good news is that there is a real and genuine alternative to send those children as well as adults home with a service like intensive care at home. There are now plenty of case studies we have already published on our website from our past and current clients, and there are more case studies to come because our client base is growing. Are politicians really trying to wash their hands clean by ignoring the day-to-day realities of long-term intensive care patients? When will politicians finally realize that providing home care, even in higher acuity areas such as intensive care, is solving many problems on a financial, physical resource, emotional, as well as on a family level? Politicians have been saying for many years that we need to get more people into home care instead of keeping them in hospitals. Nothing is happening besides lip services. The fact of the matter is that many politicians are trying to keep the status quo by funding hospitals and not funding enough home care. By not funding intensive home care or by constantly threatening our clients to cut funding and in essence sending them back to intensive care is extremely short-sighted. It puts even more pressure on already overcrowded hospitals and intensive care units, and it also costs more in the long run. In Germany, for example, about 20 years ago, it was legislated that home care needs to be funded before hospital care, and the cost of healthcare came down massively. In fact, it plummeted by providing services that people really want and that can be delivered in a home care environment. By legislating home care as a right and not an option, many of the challenges of high acuity healthcare did get solved. As a matter of fact, by bringing intensive care nursing skills into somebody's home solves many problems. Intensive Care at Home is very proud to be the first Australian third-party accredited service provider to bring intensive care nurses into the community, solving many of the problems I discussed before. Australian governments, as well as many intensive care units, still are 20 to 30 years behind when it comes to efficiently solving one of the biggest problems there is for long-term intensive care patients, their families, and for intensive care units. We can proudly say intensive care at home is solving those problems. So if you want to find out how we can help you to get your loved one out of intensive care, including palliative care or long-term acute care, also nursing home, or if you find that you have insufficient support for your loved one at home on a ventilator, or if you want to know how to get funding for our service, or if you have any questions, please send me an email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. That's Patrick just with a K at the end, or call me on one of the numbers on the top of the website. Also, have a look at our careers section. We are currently hiring ICU nurses for clients in Melbourne, Sunbury, and in South Gippsland, Victoria. We are an NDIS, TAC, and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. We have also been proudly part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program for innovative healthcare services last year. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll see you again next week in another update.